All right, we're going to call to order the special meeting of the City Council for Monday, February 7th. Can we get a roll call, please?
Mayor Hasselbrink,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Doby,
Here.
Councilmember Bates,
Here.
Councilmember Turco,
Here.
Councilmember Nofolda.
Here.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to welcome Chief Claiborne, looking all spiffy in his new uniform. Hopefully we haven't scared you off yet. I'm hearing good things about it so far, so that's great. Okay, our first item of business is the public hearing. This is the number 2 to receive input from the community regarding the redrawing of election district boundaries. City Clerk.
Thank you. As you mentioned, this is our second public hearing. It is very close to the first presentation that you guys received. We're still soliciting feedback from the public, any comments that you would like to give. We have Justin Levitt from NDC here. He'll be giving a similar presentation to the one we received back in January and answering any questions or concerns you may have. This is the second public hearing before we release the draft maps, and then our February 28th meeting will be the first meeting where we start reviewing draft maps. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Justin.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Hasselbrink, members of the council, members of the community, and thank you especially to Wendy for helping to organize this process. My name is Dr. Justin Levitt with National Demographics, and I just have a brief presentation to talk a little bit about the process and criteria. If we could pull that up on the presentation display, that would be great. Thank you. For those of you who are here and those of you who are listening to this, so it's going to provide an overview to the redistricting process and an introduction to the different tool options that the city has available. Why are we looking at this and why looking at this now? This is a really big question, particularly since the city only switched to district elections for the 2018 election, or for the 2020 election, sorry. It was right before the 2018 election, and then for the 2020 it was first used. Several of our districts have not even been used for an election yet. However, following the decennial census, so once every 10 years following that census, the state requires all cities and counties and all jurisdictions that use district-based elections to review their districts and to adjust them if necessary to comply with federal and state laws, including new state laws like the Fair Maps Act. And so the state actually lays out a process in the Fair Maps Act for how a city should redraw its boundaries. That includes at least 1 or 2 public hearings prior to the release of any draft maps. And of course, this is our second public hearing that we're discussing some of the criteria, rules, process, and procedure. Starting at our next public hearing on February 28th, we're actually going to be looking at the maps themselves. So we'll dive right into the maps at that meeting and look at some of the potential options to redraw the lines. We are looking to basically hold 2 public hearings on the 28th and March 7th to discuss, and perhaps the council or the public can request modifications or changes to those draft maps. And ultimately, final adoption in March prior to the April 17th deadline. The April 17th deadline was set by the registrars in order to get the districts in place for the 2022 election. Now, in terms of the process, the Fair Maps Act also sets out a new set of rules and criteria that didn't exist when the city switched to district elections. And so these actually shape the rules of the game, how we have to draw the boundaries. Federal law in that first column has not changed. The Supreme Court guidance on equal population in the Voting Rights Act remains as it always has been. Districts must be substantively equal in terms of their population. We'll talk more about this when we look at the numbers in a couple of slides. Essentially, you are allowed some minor variation from that perfectly equal number in order to keep communities together and follow the other criteria, but we still have to stay within a deviation of 10%. That means that the difference in population between the largest and smallest districts cannot be more than 10% of a district's total population. In addition, we have to follow the Federal Voting Rights Act. Race cannot be the only factor or even the predominant factor in the creation of a district, but it must be one of many factors that we consider alongside all of the other criteria. And we'll talk about that again as we look at some of the maps and numbers in the rest of this presentation. The California criteria for cities in that middle column, this is where the new Fair Maps Act list of criteria really comes out. The state has rank ordered a series of 4 criteria that you must consider after equal population. First on their list is contiguity. Districts, all parts of a district must touch each other. That is, you can't have a district that is connected only at a point or a corner. You can't have a district that is only contiguous by the stretch of a road. It has to actually physically touch all parts of that district. You have to be able to walk or drive from one part of that district to every other part of the district without leaving the district. And so, what this is going to mean is that that's just going to be something we can objectively evaluate and look at all the draft maps that we receive. Second, undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. Again, we're going to talk more about this one as well on the next couple of slides. The overall point of this criteria is that areas that share certain commonalities or bonds, socioeconomic or geographic areas according to the law, that should be kept together for the purpose of their fair and effective representation should be kept together. Third, easily identifiable boundaries. This is the principle that districts should be easy for voters to understand. To the extent we can follow major roads, other natural and man-made features, and maybe even jurisdictional subdivisions, we should strive to do so. Compactness is number 4. This is the idea that you should not bypass one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. Now, these are rank ordered. So if you're bypassing a group of people because that keeps a community together, because there certainly are communities that are not exactly in a straight line or in a rectangle form, then we have to do that first. Keep the communities together first before we consider compactness. It's also prohibited in the Fair Maps Act to consider partisanship. Our database does not contain partisan information. The council cannot consider partisanship as part of their evaluation. Finally, in that third column, these are other factors that courts have recognized as being valid over the past 200 years of redistricting. While these do not rise to the same level as the mandatory federal and state criteria, these are things that we can look at if we're, say, comparing 2 maps that we think do equally well under the Fair Maps Act criteria. For example, minimizing voter shifted is the idea that if voters are expecting to have an election this November, moving them to a district that elects in 2024 delays their ability to elect by 2 years. Now, some of this might be inevitable. We might have to move it based on where people live, how the districts are drawn, but we should strive to minimize it if we can. Again, these kinds of criteria only really impact us after we've taken into account the Fair Maps Act and the federal criteria. Other examples of this include future population growth. I know there's been a very vibrant conversation at our last hearing about this, and it's something that a lot of cities worry about. This is, we have to use the 2020 census count as to the census counted the population, but we can, within that 10% deviation, take into account potential future development if we know that there's going to be projects in a particular area of the city, underpopulating an area where we know we have a large project coming up. But we still have to stay within that 10% deviation. And so let's talk about some of these criteria in more detail, because this first round of hearings really focuses on the idea of communities of interest in neighborhoods. This is one of the areas that's really up to residents of the city and the council to define. Now, Los Alamitos is actually easier than a lot of places. There's a planning map that we got when we went to district elections that had 17 distinct neighborhoods and planned communities labeled throughout the cities. And these are great examples of neighborhoods. They have a specific plan. They have a designated planning area you can view on a map. And these are kind of the building blocks that we'll be using to build our districts from. Now, some of these communities, particularly Apartment Row, are going to be too large to fit into one single district. And so one of the big questions that we need to ask as we look forward is, how exactly does a large community that makes up over 2 districts worth of population divide itself, or are there natural divisions within apartment row that might help us figure out the best way to divide it to make sure that its residents have an equal opportunity to elect and influence an election. And so that's going to be one of the big questions, I think, as we look at how to redraw the boundaries. Most of our communities are relatively small and make up only a fraction of a district, but some of them are more substantially sized. Now, our current districts, this is kind of the background to this, our current districts have a deviation of 21.5%. This means that they do have to be redrawn to get that deviation under 10%. If we look at the details of this is really driven by District 3, where the population is 16.3% overpopulated. And on the other hand, we have several districts that are about 5% underpopulated. Now, if we look at the raw numbers, we're not talking about large numbers. In most cities, if I had a deviation of 385 people, that would be maybe 1 or 2% deviation at most. But of course, this is all relative to the size of the city. And so with 11,793 people counted as in the 2020 census count, we're actually looking at just about 2,560 residents per district. And that means that a deviation of even just 30 or 50 people is actually fairly substantial. So if one new apartment complex opened in apartment row between 2010 and 2020, that could account for the entirety of the deviation. We also want to look a little bit at the Voting Rights Act analysis. While there's currently no majority Latino or majority Asian American districts, there is a substantial Latino community in Old Town, particularly Old Town West. I know it doesn't look like a huge area on the map, but it is the biggest concentration, and several of the blocks in there, as we see in the lighter blues or yellows or greens, are 40 to 50% Latino. Just to kind of give you the coloring, the purple areas are under 25% Latino. The areas in the lighter blues are in between 25 and 50%. And as we go into the pink or yellow, we're getting into majority Latino areas. There is one pink block kind of to the north end of Old Town. There's actually only 2 residents counted in there. It's actually all commercial. We don't know why the census counted 2 people there, but that's one of the odd things you often get with census numbers. Where we're looking at the bulk of the residential population, we do see that concentration a little bit south of that, but on Los Alamitos and Catella. Looking at the Asian population, again, the big green area that's about 55% Asian, that's Klein Manor. And so that's, only got about 100 people resident there, but that's where they're being counted. We do see a little bit in the north end of the city, particularly on the border with Cyprus, is where we see a slightly larger Asian population. We also can look, as part of this process, at other factors. And so some of the demographics that we've pulled to look at include, for example, where we find multifamily housing. Of course, apartment row really stands out. But also, we do see that Old Town West, right where we are now, has some multifamily housing as well. If we look at income, we can see some interesting patterns and trends as well. Particularly kind of, the Old Town West area where we are now has a lower percentage of people earning over $75,000 than most of the areas on the northern and western or eastern side of the city. We also have a lot of other measures if there's anything that anyone would like to see. These demographics are not the full story, but they certainly help us understand the differences between different communities and neighborhoods. And of course, I mentioned that neighborhood map. This comes out of the city's general plan, and we used it last time, and we've rebuilt it this time with our current numbers to look at the populations of each community or neighborhood to the extent we can divide them up. And transitioning into that section.
Can we ask a question?
Of course.
What roughly is the population of Old Town East? So just across Los Al Boulevard.
Sure. Old Town East, and I'll have the exact number on one of the tools that we have available. I believe it has about 400 residents.
Okay, thank you.
And you know, I'll show you a tool that we have that we list all the populations of all the different neighborhoods in the city, and that's available on the website. What I want to emphasize with the mapping tools is that we want to hear from you however you want to submit to us, particularly for any members of the community who are listening or watching. You know, don't feel like, you know, you have to create an entire map. If that's not what you want, you can certainly submit your comments either in person or in writing. We are happy to receive them by email or dropped off at City Hall. We also have a variety of mapping tools where you can draw your neighborhood, your district, or basically draw block by block to create an entire city map. We really want to hear from you however you want to provide it to us. Now, I mentioned that neighborhoods population tool. This is available on the city website. It's a one-page map of the city with all the neighborhoods labeled. We've divided Apartment Row up into a whole bunch of different subunits to give, actually literally block by block, to give you a sense of the population numbers in there. Because of all the neighborhoods, it's the one neighborhood that has to be divided because it's too large. The next largest neighborhood after Apartment Row is Old Town West, which has about 1,100 residents. And then Apartment Row has over about 5,000. And so what we've done is we've listed all the neighborhoods, including several different Apartment Row blocks. And they're all labeled, and they've got the total populations of each of those areas on there. So that gives you very precise counts for the areas. We also have included area populations for the areas that are not assigned into neighborhoods. Because even though perhaps they're not zoned residential, there still are people that the census counted. Like I mentioned, 2 people at the convenience store on Los Alamitos Boulevard, the 90 people in Klein Manor. You know, the hospital has a resident population, and other places where the census counted people, we list them all. And I know a lot of people last time really wanted to see those numbers for the different neighborhoods, and so this is the best way to really just take a look at those total population counts. In addition to that tool, we also have some browser-based tools. Dave's Redistricting is kind of a paint the city tool. You start with either a blank map of the city or one with the current districts on it. And, you know, basically all, you know, what you're doing is you're literally painting by color the areas you want to keep or add or subtract to the different districts. We have a guide, a PDF guide that, you know, gives you a step-by-step instruction manual, everything from signing up for the program to submitting your map at the end of the day. We're also working on getting online Maptitude for redistricting. This is another tool that's also browser-based. You create an account. You can see more data in Maptitude than in any other tool. If you liked all of our color thematic maps of the, you know, Latino population or apartment population, they're all in Maptitude for redistricting. And it lets you see real time the effects of moving one block from one district to another. I'll say it does have the steepest learning curve, so give yourself time if you are using it, but it is perhaps the most powerful tool that we have available. And so what we're looking to get tonight is to answer your questions about the process, about the criteria, and about the tools. And would also love to get some direction or anything that we should take into consideration when we start drawing the maps. If you don't want to say anything tonight, you can still submit via email over the next 2 weeks. Again, our plan is to get some draft maps, probably at 2 or 3 different options, out about a week before the 28th for that council meeting. So with that, I thank you all for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Being a public hearing, I'm going to open it up for public comment if anybody from the public would like to speak. Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to council, and Councilmember Bates.
Yeah, just one more question. In all the criteria that you've laid out, there doesn't seem to be any geographic size requirement. So I guess my question to you is, we could have a district that's very small, all apartment row, heavy, high density, and that wouldn't be a problem, provided it met all the other criteria.
That's absolutely true.
Okay.
In fact, if you look at a lot of maps, you'll see that a lot of times there's variety simply based on the geography of the city.
Right.
I can tell you District 5 is going to look, whichever district has the military base at the end of this, is going to be substantially larger than any other district simply because of the airfield.
Got it.
Any other questions? Just one quick question. How do you count residents in the assisted living facilities? I mean, they're,
Sure.
could be long-term, could be a week or so. Do they count as voting residents?
So anybody who was counted as part of that 2020 census count was counted. And that includes long-term care facilities. That's where we see population like at the hospital, like how are there people living in the hospitals, but they do ask the hospital, how many long-term residents do you have? And institutions like hospitals, military, schools, and long-term care facilities all provide what they call institutional numbers to the Census Bureau on April 1st, 2020 in this case.
Okay, so the patients like at Alameda's West, those are counted as part of our residents?
Yes.
Okay,
And so it's their April 1st, 2020 count.
okay.
It may be different because, that's the kind of thing that might fluctuate, but it's as of that particular date, that's when they ask all the institutions to submit their number.
Okay.
Mayor Hasselbrink, if I can. I noticed that we have a deadline for submission of the maps on February 21st. Can we make sure those will be publicized online, just so residents have a chance to see them? We know a lot of residents don't look up our agendas, so
Yeah.
if we can ensure those are publicized so they have a chance to see them somewhere other than our website, that'd be great.
And being February 21st is a holiday, is that a true, if we receive something on February 21st, even though it's a holiday, it'll still count? Okay.
So, when we switched to districts, we had to post things a full week before the actual hearing. For redistricting, we have a little more flexibility. So if we get things posted on Tuesday because of the holiday on Monday, we're still okay to talk about it at the next week's hearing.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? All right, I think this is just a receive and file.
Ma'am?
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. All right, now we're going to go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. I will open it up again for public comment on the consent calendar. At this time, any individual from the audience may come forward to speak on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Remarks are to be limited to not more than 5 minutes per speaker. I don't see any, so I will go ahead and go to the consent calendar. I'll just read it. All consent calendar items may be acted upon in one motion unless a council member requests separate action on a specific item. Would you like to pull?
Item C.
Okay, item C. Anybody else? Yeah, he just pulled C, so that'll be pulled. Perfect. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and wait for the other ones to vote on all of them together. So do you need a staff report?
Yes, if we could have a staff report on item C, and specifically emphasizing maybe how the position would work in terms of supervision, responsibility, since it's divided between two departments.
Of course, sir. And perhaps if I can take all the questions all at once, I might be able to
You
weave.
just rephrased what I was going.
All right, well,
Beat you to it.
that makes it a little easy. So essentially, as we've been going through just our normal kind of, I'll call it scrubbing of how exactly we put our staffing plans together, we've noticed that there's an opportunity in a couple different departments where if we were to combine some of the duties, we can actually cross-train some of our staff in order to be able to work in more than one department. This is reminiscent of the idea that we talked about having different management analysts that we could put in Public Works one week, and then we can move them to Development Services the next week. We could move them to Recreation the next week. And each one of those departments would have somebody who not only knows how to do the individual work, but also understands how the dynamics work in other departments. And so having this person who's going to be able to oversee a lot of the operations and programs that are running out of the rec department, but also will be able to take a look at all of the upcoming CIP projects that are going to come out of this year's budget. They'll be able to marry those two skill sets together and be able to tell the rec department that, hey, we're going to start construction on this park at this time, and so therefore we have to move this program to someplace else. And at the same time, they'll be able to work with the development team and know that, hey, we can't put a trash can over there because that's where we're going to have the new pickleball court. So by combining that knowledge together, I think that we're going to get a better product at the end of the day. And some of the things that we've been trying to do as well is identifying pathways for our employees forward. And so essentially what we're looking at is trying to build out programs where we have a 3 and a 7-year plan for our employees and ways that they can advance through their career. And it's a way of not only showing that we value them, that we want to see them get better, but we're also making them more valuable to the organization, and they are also gaining those additional skills that they might not get if they were pigeonholed into one department. So, and from a management standpoint, I'll just say that the lion's share of the work to start will probably be within the rec department. So Director Noda will have, the vast majority of say during the first 6 months. And then after that, as we transition into more CIP projects, the other Director Noda will have more management responsibility during that time. But it is a true shared position between the two departments.
I do. So my concern, and I guess I think you've kind of addressed it, but it's rather difficult sometimes to work for two bosses.
Yes.
So ultimately, one person needs to be, I think,
Yes.
responsible for doing the evaluation. Certainly, they need to have input from the other director, but ultimately, I think if we're going to get really good performance out of that staff member, they need to have an ultimate boss who's going to write their evaluation, sit down with them, with the input from the other director. So that's kind of where I was going.
Completely agree. And I think the way that we're going to do this is by setting up, before we start each cycle, and cycle being where we might have somebody in a new spot, the director who's going to be in charge will sit down and lay out what exactly the expectations are for that person and prioritize them with the other director to make sure that we're not doubling just the amount of work that someone's going to have, but we have a clear expectation of what they need to achieve. And then that director will be in charge of implementing that plan all the way through. So there may be a change every 6 months, every 12 months, but during that period of time, there will be a very clear, no, this person is in charge.
Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, I have a comment, though. I actually think it's pretty brilliant, because when you are limited on what you can do to show appreciation for staff, training and additional responsibility for the win every single time. And then it also helps, and it looks like you guys are learning from the chaos that the Panorama started with people that could not fill in. I am not, as an HR professional, a fan of only one person being able to do a job. So I think that this is very forward-thinking. You guys are, again, making me proud to be a Los Alamedian, and I expect for it to work wonderfully.
All right, Los Alamidian, that's a new one.
Oh, I got
Okay.
a lot.
Oh, here we go.
I'll move the consent calendar.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Good. All right, so with that, the city council will adjourn to Monday, February 28th, 2022 at 6 PM. Off to the gym.